Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, October 19th, 2023. Just reminded me that it's my older brother's birthday, so I need to wish him a happy birthday. Happy birthday, Scott. Tonight's format, for those of you that might be new to this format, is an open forum. So, any questions you want to present to me from the live audience throughout the broadcast, Livy, who's moderating for me this evening, will collect those questions and pass those on when there's an open space in the broadcast. As always, if you want to send in questions, suggestions, ideas, feedback in between sessions, you can always email webinar@evoketherapy.com. If you send in a question, that question will be put to the top of the queue at the next broadcast. Before I get into my first pre-submitted question, we have 4 for this evening. I just want to announce again the young adult workshop in New York City, run by Emma Reedy, happens to be my daughter, a fantastic and gifted therapist and facilitator. Emma will be hosting an all-day workshop for young adults, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Very inexpensive, $50 registration. There's going to be group activities. It's a really an opportunity to find out if you're stuck, if you're feeling like you don't even know what questions to ask, or you don't know the answers to the questions you have that you're passionate about. This is an opportunity to at least see why or what is blocking you from having access to those questions. Emma, those of you that know her, is a gifted facilitator and can provide a process, a safe enough process for you to discover that. So check that out. You can contact Becky at evoketherapy.com. That's BECCI at evoketherapy.com to find out more and to register. All right, folks. So with that, I'm going to take the pre-submitted questions for this evening. The first one that comes in on the heels of our last broadcast is, do you see ambivalent attachment more in a divorced family that have a 50-50 type of arrangement? First of all, I want to make clear one thing, that the style of attachment as it manifests itself in the child is not perfectly correlated to the parent's behavior. I think it's really important, like all mental health issues, all mental illness, all addictions, that we understand that the wound itself is not necessarily represented by the disorder or the symptoms that are presenting themselves. Those are a distraction. Those are our way of coping. So you can kind of learn to cope with things in different ways, and that doesn't necessarily point very clearly to the original wound itself. However, what we would see in somebody that's presenting with this kind of attachment, this ambivalent attachment, is that at some point their needs were neglected. They weren't attended to. That can happen in intact families. That can happen in divorced families. What I will tell you is that sometimes divorce leads to a parent or both parents or just one being more capable of attending to the child's needs. That can happen as the result of divorce. And I'm sure some of you can relate to that who have been through this process or known of this process. Sometimes the divorce itself serves to free the parent, one of the parents up to be able to focus more primarily on the child. Of course, there are challenges in divorced families. There are limited resources. Oftentimes, both parents are required to work to support two households, whereas in intact families, that might not be the case, although that happens a lot too. Maybe they're dating and looking for their own passion in life. And so if the parent is unavailable for whatever reason, and the child learns through this process to not rely on the parent, then the subsequent ambivalent attachment is to say, I can't or don't go or won't go to my parents for comfort. I don't have any needs. There might be a subjugation or repression of needs, or I'm going to get those needs met in other ways, sometimes symptomatically. So I said this one time a long time ago, and it's poetic as much as it is instructive. I said, when a child's cries go unanswered, the child doesn't learn to just not cry anymore. The child learns not to feel anymore. And while that's not universally true, like I said, it's poetic as much as it is, or more than it is instructive. That's the process. If our needs go unmet, or if our needs go punished, right? Our parents or the big people around us shame us for our needs, or reject us for our needs, or get frustrated or overwhelmed or dysregulated at the presentation of our needs. We as children, to survive childhood, will split off that part of ourself. We will repress it. We will make it unknown to the conscious mind. Now, of course, later in life, that unconscious repressed energy, that repressed need will somehow, in most cases, find its way to the surface, finds its way to speak to us indirectly. That's why when you're doing your work, to hate your symptoms, to be angry at your symptoms or the symptoms of your child, in a sense, you're being angry at the lost child. So ambivalent attachment can occur and fits very well when the child's needs aren't attended to. The parent or parents are unavailable. If the divorce permits and allows the parent to frees the parent up to be more available to the child, then that particular presentation doesn't make sense. But again, with a divided house, oftentimes resources, not just financial, but others are very split, right? You might be one or both parents might be dating or looking for a partner or looking for their social needs to be met outside of the home, where in an intact family those needs might be inside of the home with the partner, with the marital partner. So the child will develop this pseudo independence, and that's my style of attachment as a child, so I can easily relate to it. It's difficult for me to ask for help. It's difficult for me to remain connected to my needs. I wrote this another time where to ask somebody with an ambivalent attachment, anxious ambivalent attachment, to get in touch with their needs or their inner self, you're in essence asking them to revisit a nightmare in their life, a time in their life, unconscious as it may be, to revisit a time when there was a sense of dread, a sense of loneliness and abandonment, an unspeakable pain. So you're not just asking them to be present in the given moment that you're looking at or considering. You're asking them to reconnect with something that they jettisoned to survive, to 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 mitigate the amount of pain that went from that unmet need. So, yeah, that's my answer. It's first, it's not necessarily a direct cause and effect, and it can happen in both families. But if parents are unavailable, no matter what the parental structure is, a child is likely to develop this style of not being in touch with their needs, not being able to voice their needs, not even owning their needs. And then because needs are still there, even though they might not be realized or be something that the individual is connected to, those needs are going to be expressed symptomatically, right? Overeating, drugs, alcohol, gambling, depression, self-harm, right? You're going to find a way to feed that child that was starved as a child. So, all right, the next question is a three-parter, a long one. So let me put on my reading glasses. Part one. I recently listened to your podcast on PTSD, and it made me wonder how you know if a child has PTSD or they're just making excuses. My son, 19, and has been oppositionally defiant since he was old enough to walk. He has been given to arguing about everything, and over time, we decided to send him to wilderness therapy when he was almost 14 years old because boundaries, consequences, and consistency weren't working, and he acted out abusively. Because he was adopted, I did not want him to think we were abandoning him, so I asked an expert. His psychiatrist said it was a good idea. Fast forward. He barely graduated high school and got into one college, and at the last minute decided not to go to college. We supported him working on a trade school. He worked only a few hours and did nothing but use THC and stayed in his room. Currently, we are paying for him to stay in a hotel until he gets a full-time job and an apartment, and we gave him 3 months. Recently, he went back to lamenting how we ruined his life by saying something was wrong with him by getting therapists involved, and also lamented that I kept sending him away and we lied to him that one time. I, his mom, apologized months ago for lying and said it was wrong. I made no excuses. Is he traumatized if he's essentially the same kid making excuses, arguing and doing whatever he wants despite consequences? He has always had rage when he had to do anything that he didn't want to do. He is definitely self-sabotaging and has trouble moving forward, which is PTSD-like. At this point, I am wondering if not doing anything would have mattered at all, or if he would not be so messed up as he says we made him. And lastly, all I know is that we waited almost 14 years before he had to go away for a time because counselors had no answers and said we were doing a good job as his parents. They blamed it on his birth parents' personality or his trauma of adoption at birth. He was getting worse at home when he was 13. He didn't seem to learn quickly or make changes, just excuses about how we were weird and bad parents. Do you think sometimes it is better not to get help from professionals? Are there times when no one really knows what is wrong and what to do? I am working on myself and am not acting in fear, although I have valid concerns and I love my son. It is such a long game. Thank you for your thoughts. What a wonderfully detailed and articulated story. Thank you for that. I have several thoughts about this. In fact, Livy, if you could keep this up, I might have to refer to it because it's got so many points that I want to refer to. In one sense, it doesn't matter if he has PTSD because the response is the same. I talked about this recently at a speaking engagement where I was asked to come to speak to parents of elementary school age children. And the basic premise, literally spoken out loud, was what can you teach us so that we don't have to need your program someday for our child? Because none of them were coming because of acute difficulty at this point, this particular group of parents that I was speaking to. And what I said to them is I thought about my question, my mission to speak to them. What I thought was treatment for mental health issues is the same behavior as prevention. And I think that's true. The response to a child who says they have PTSD, who says that I ruined their life, whether it was because you sent them away, whether was because you were hovering and anxious, whether it was because you told them that something was wrong with them, because you outsourced your own agency to professionals, it doesn't matter what the cause is. The response is the same. The response is if you can, and that's a big if you can, and what I mean by if you can is if it's okay with you, if it feels authentic and genuine and honest for you. If you can, you listen, you validate, you acknowledge that you're imperfect. You acknowledge that you have many faults and flaws, some of which he's identified and some of which he hasn't. I'm sure that some of the biological parents and the adoption have something to do with his issues. I don't have any doubt about that. Most people will say it's a part of the makeup. I've said this before that when I get children who have been adopted in treatment, I'll oftentimes ask them where adoption fits into the picture. Most often they will say it doesn't matter at all because, of course, it's pre-conscious material, it's unconscious material. Or maybe they're protecting the birth or the adopted parents. Any kind of concentration on the adoption as a wound somehow is a betrayal to the parents that you have that adopted you, that you love and that love you. You're carrying their ego, right? So part of the question then is I'll give them an assignment to work on adoption assignments, maybe to read a book, maybe to write a letter to the birth parents, whether or not they're going to send it or not, just to open things up. Oftentimes, a week or two into treatment, the child will come into a session and say, adoption is everything. It's all of it. The book that I read, the letter that I wrote that brought up so much material, the group that we had on adoption with the 2 or 3 other students in our group who are adopted. I think it's everything. It's the source of all of my distress. And of course, the truth is somewhere in between. The truth is it's not everything and it's not nothing. It's something. How big of a puzzle piece it is in the equation of the development of the self, that's for the individual themselves to figure out over time. But as an adopted parent, as somebody who loves your child, your responsibility is when you can to listen, to let them be mad. And frankly, I've been saying this a lot lately, and I hope it makes sense. It doesn't, I can't overemphasize what I'm about to say. In a very simple way, speaking specifically to parents, but this works if you're not a parent or if you're a partner, that mental health is defined by the ability to see yourself clearly, meaning that you see your humanity, your fallibility, your imperfectness. I think we think mental health is getting better. And while that's definitely a part of mental health and being mentally healthy, we overemphasize that idea of being good, being evolved, being enlightened. See, enlightenment isn't being good. Enlightenment is being whole. Enlightenment isn't getting it or it better, getting it right or doing it better. It's coming to terms with the fact that you get it wrong all the time. It's accepting and loving what I call, as the subtitle of my second book, loving your horrible, rotten self. Carl Jung's comment of "I'd rather be whole than good." Ram Dass's his statement on you can't counteract the feeling, the sense of I am bad with I am good, because that keeps the person at the level of polarities. And the fact of the matter is, you are good and bad and everything in between. You are sometimes generous and sometimes stingy, sometimes wise, sometimes naive and ignorant. Sometimes you are very giving. Sometimes you are very afraid. Sometimes you are kind. Sometimes you are cruel. You are you. But we just can't get our brains out of this right or wrong, good and bad sensibility. And we think that the answers are found there. And the answers are found, as Rumi says, the poet says, the answers are found out beyond right and wrongdoing, as he says. Out beyond right doing and wrongdoing, there's a field. I will meet you there, he says. It is something else. Nietzsche talked about the dragon of should. Campbell talks about the dragon of should and should not. And on every scale is written the phrase, thou shalt and thou shalt not. Right? The greatest religious leaders that have walked on the earth have been heretics to the dominant culture and the dominant religion. Right? They are trailblazers and rebels. My point being with all of this, that as you become comfortable with yourself and your child says, "Mom, you screwed me up, Dad, you screwed me up," your response is obviously, "I did." You can't escape denting your children. The only thing you can do is accept it and let the child be hurt and angry about it, or because you're holding on to that idea that the goal is to be good and one is capable of being good, that you have to defend yourself. And then the child gets abandoned. Because if they present you with data or information that you sent them away or lied to them or pick any sin that you could have committed, if you need to defend against those things because you have to be good, the child gets abandoned. The child has the experience of not being seen, not being understood, not being heard. So the antidote for whatever ails your son is listening. But before listening, and this is the real mystery, before listening, before containing, that's the clinical term, before seeing them, you have to find yourself. And yourself is a fallible, imperfect human being with lots of flaws. As I get older, I was just saying to a client recently, somebody was presented with a life decision that had all kinds of complicated choices in it. And my response was, 15 years ago, I probably would have had an opinion about what you should do. And I probably would have, in one way or another, told you what that is. But I've grown up and I don't know anymore. So enlightenment and awareness is less sure of what's right and what the correct way is. It's more humble. It's more loving, because when you get away from good and bad and right and wrong, the only thing that's left is love. If I've accepted myself as I am, and that's theoretical, of course, but if I have, and you get mad at me, I'm available to hear you, to see you, to listen, even to let you tell me the story where I was the villain. And that ability to do those things is love in action. That's what I mean when I say, once you get rid of right and wrong and being good, the only thing left is love. Once the ego dies, once you experience some significant ego death, which usually happens about midlife, if you're open to it, and it feels terrifying and it's messy and it's a crisis often, But once there's that ego death at midlife, you are more kind and more loving. You're not spending all of your energy trying to prove I'm a good mom, I'm a good dad, good spouse, good partner, good friend, good person. So you have to be boundaried first. That goes back to the thing. If you can listen and hold space for him, I wrote in The Audacity to Be You, to understand somebody, you have to lose your mind, which is a playful uh, turn of a phrase, right? You have to kind of see the world through your child's eyes. But again, don't do it because it's the right thing to do or that's the good thing to do. You do it because you can. You do it because you've done work. You do it because your belly is full. You know the phrase that Maya Angelou is credited with saying. She didn't quite say it, by the way, but she's credited with the adage that says, "If I knew better, I would do better." Well, I think really what it is if I felt better, I would do better. If I feel good about me, if I have an inner knowing that I am okay, I don't need you to like me. I don't need you to be pleased with me. I don't rely on my child's opinion or my spouse's opinion. Now, if I'm not taking care of myself because my boundaries are poor, which by the way comes from this attachment to being good again, right? That's what prevents us of setting healthy boundaries is that we have to be good. You see how it all goes back to that? But if I'm setting good boundaries, I can be available. If I'm not setting good boundaries, if I'm depleted, if I'm not feeding myself spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, rest, all the things that a human being needs, then I'm not available to you to love you. I have no patience. I'll critique the way you give me feedback. I'll critique the words that you use. I'll point out that you didn't use the I feel statement language correctly. I'll tell you that you're raising your voice. I'll make you responsible for my inability to love you, for my inability to listen. Versus saying, I'm overwhelmed, I'm dysregulated, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm stressed, I've been dealing with a lot today. I need to take some space. When I am fed, I will come back and be available to you. So, long-winded answer to say, your job is to hear him and to make sure that fundamentally, alongside, or maybe most accurately said, beneath your listening, you have to make sure that you're attending to yourself and taking care of yourself. And if you feel the need to defend yourself, there's work to do. And it's okay. It's human to say to people that we love and care about, even when they're expressing genuine pain, it is okay to say, I can't. This is my limit. And I'm going to go work on myself, which means attend to myself, which means I'm going to fail right now in this discussion and be willing to face that. And when I'm better fed, better rested, I'll come back and see if I can give this another go. So it doesn't matter if he has the diagnosis or not. And it doesn't matter if that was a mistake or not. You made plenty of mistakes. As a thought experiment, so I sometimes say to parents, and I'm not being cruel or mean, I just say, let's just assume, right? Let's just assume you've already screwed up the kid. And developmental psychologists would tend to agree that by the age of teenage or young adulthood, you've done the damage. And I don't mean that in a shameful, critical way. I just mean it's a human thing that happens. And so instead of trying to get it right or fix it, what can you do to be available for the repair? What can you do available to listen? And you don't have to judge whether they're accurate or not. You don't have to judge whether their story is made up, whether they're using it as an excuse, whether a it's a condition of the mismatch that happens sometimes between adoptive parents and children that they don't share genetics with. Maybe the child has a different style, a learning style, a different way of processing information, a learning, maybe a learning disability or a temperament that doesn't fit your family, which can happen with birth families too. Doesn't matter. That's not that's not what makes the difference. What makes the difference is, can you be available first and foremost to yourself? Can you take care of yourself? And then can you be available to the people that you love? And can you make sure that you take care of your boundaries? He'll figure it out at this point. And I don't mean this in a sense that you abandon the child. I mean it in a as a metaphysical truth. It's not your life's problem to figure out, it's his. The questions that you're asking are more important for him to figure out an answer, not for you to, because your response is the same. Sometimes when I'm coaching couples, the couples will ask me, well, my husband is taking a time out. Maybe he's just punishing me. Or my wife is exaggerating and making up things. And my thought is, it doesn't matter what they're doing and what's going on inside of your head. The response is the same. What can you do? What can't you do? Can you own that limitation, that human limitation? And to the extent that you're capable and available to be there for them in a loving, compassionate, patient way, can you do that? But remember, all of these broadcasts that I do, all of these podcasts, all of the teaching, all of the writing, it's not to tell you how to get it right. I'm trying to let you know what it looks like when you experience a transformation of consciousness. That's why it doesn't help for therapists to tell you what to do. Because therapy, in the way that I see therapy, isn't about doing the good or the right thing. The outcome of therapy, as I say, isn't what you get out of it, but what you become in the process. That's what our myths and our stories are teaching us. That's what the early psychologists discovered, the psychiatrists and psychologists discovered, is that it's a fundamental shift. It's a different way of being. And it's hard to explain to people that are farther behind on the path, that are just starting off, and so we use metaphor, we use parables, we use analogies and stories and mythology. And Jung's term and Joseph Campbell's terminology, that's the purpose of myth. Not to tell you what you should and shouldn't do, but to give you some lay of the land of what it looks like. So I hope that makes sense. And I hope you can find some peace. And I hope your son can find some peace in the process. All right, I'm ready for the next one. Somebody writes, I have been meaningfully engaged in doing my work and healing my codependency and other attachment wounds since sending my daughter to a therapeutic boarding school in 2019. I recently heard Gabor Mate share that he has a childhood wound of not being seen. He went on to say, and my apologies if I get this wrong, that he needs to see himself. And that as we learn to see ourselves, we no longer become triggered when the other doesn't see us. Not being seen or heard is a wound for me and consequently a trigger. While I can work to see myself, honestly, I have no idea what it looks like. I would still tend to feel disconnected from a person that does not hear me and see me in a way that makes me feel seen and heard. Is this still codependency? Is my healing achieved when I need only see myself? Let me tell you the first of all about Gabor Mate. He's right about some of it, but he only gets the top layer of things because he's not a therapist. He has no training as a therapist, zero. He's a medical doctor. So he doesn't know the mechanism. He can identify trauma. He's, in our lifetime, has been the most prolific writer and speaker about trauma that we know of. He talks about it as much as anybody. He's the most popular person on earth today, or at least in the United States, talking about trauma. He's right about that. And he's actually right about seeing yourself. But he doesn't understand the mechanism of healing and repair. You first have to get seen by somebody. So if you don't get seen by a parent, which, by the way, encompasses most people, and it's a continuum, right? It's not you do get seen or you don't get seen. It's a continuum, and we all fall on that continuum somewhere. So if that's the wound, and it happens at critical developmental stages, really critical stages, to repair it later on after those critical stages have passed, we have to spend a lot of time with somebody who can see us. And what that looks like is sitting across from an empathic other who can patiently and genuinely see us. When I talk about in the book this seminal moment, this profound moment when my therapist says to me about 15 years ago, "Brad, you don't understand what we're doing here. If you came into my office and told me you were having sex with a chicken, I would assume you had a good reason and I would just want to understand why." What she's saying is, I'm not going to freak out. I'm not going to be disgusted. I'm not going to run away and panic. I'm going to see you and understand you. And that's what heals. You spend enough time with that person and you develop what is called an earned attachment, something that happens later in life. You see, therapy becomes the childhood in a sense that you never had. And the therapist becomes, in a sense, the parent that you never had. I have learned this. The only way one learns this, by experience. If I probably read some of this in books in graduate school, but it didn't stick with me because I had no experience with it. But now, after having sat in a room with Jamie Gill for 25 years, 24 years, I have experience with this. And because she can sit with me in all of my idiocies and all of my foibles and all of my ignorance, my stupidity, my unkindness, my irrational, she sits with me patiently. And after a while, I start to have the experience that I'm okay. Counteracting the childhood wound of not being seen, of being too much or not enough for my parents, and therefore having this wound that something's wrong with me. So Mate's right. That's how it gets caused, the fracture, the attachment issue. And you know how it gets cured is the exact same way. Nobody knows this. Nobody talks about it. It's the same thing. You've got to find somebody who can love your horrible, rotten self. And I will tell you, because Jamie has sat with me all of these years through all of my twists and turns and craziness, now I can sit with me. You see how that works? Now I can see me. I told the story. It's it's such a strange story. I made a mess somewhere in my house, but nobody kind of knew it was me. And I left for the day. I was in a hurry. It was the morning time. And later on the day, when I got home, my wife said, your daughter left a mess and she won't take accountability. Something like that. Very, very small issue. And quickly I said, letting it without letting it sit too long, I said, it was me. I did that. I left that mess. And my wife said, thank you. Thanks for telling me. And I know that sounds like a small thing, but that's what a secure attachment looks like in practice. I was able to be quote unquote bad because I left a mess. But because I've now internalized this copy of Jamie Gill inside of me that says if I'm having sex with a chicken, it still is worthy of connection and compassion and understanding, right? So making a mess is nothing. That's how I can see myself now. That's why I can admit, that's why I spend all of these broadcasts telling you guys what an idiot I am constantly. Because somebody saw my idiotness and loved me. Do you remember the story when my mother came up to me after a talk that I gave and said, I think maybe I should feel bad for some of the ways that I raised you boys? And I said to her, I don't care about the bad feeling. That doesn't help me. I don't need you to feel bad. But it would be nice if you knew what you did. That would be a real gift if you could see that and own that. And I even said to her, you're feeling bad about it. Here's the magic. You're feeling bad about it actually will probably prevent you being able to see it. You see, because my mother grew up in a home where she had to be a good girl, where there was a proper and a right way to be. And if you weren't that, you weren't lovable and worthy of connection. Parents got frustrated and angry and disappointed. So for my mother to survive that rejection, and it was not unusual for the time for most people, because my mother felt so threatened by her parents' rejection of her when she wasn't right and proper and good. She denied that those parts of herself existed. And then she goes out in the world hurting people and making mistakes and being human and can't take responsibility because it's too threatening. So you spend time with a therapist, like Jamie Gill says, what was once bad at home is now nothing. And what happens when you spend enough time with somebody is you start to notice the constructions, the falseness of your childhood, the false ideas of your childhood. And what was once unacceptable and disgusting is now human. That's what the movie's about. That's what the stories are about. That's what the mystics are trying to teach us. That's what the myths are trying to teach us. So yes, in the end, it is about your ability to see yourself. But how do you get there? You first have to be seen by somebody else. Jessica Benjamin, a great writer on attachment theory, says the root of the self is found through somebody else. We must first be seen. Mr. Fred Rogers, his broadcast, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, when we were growing up, when I was growing up, what he do with his little children? He just saw them. He held their anger, he held their fear and their anxiety. He was gentle with it. And when a big person is gentle and kind with your humanness, you can own it. When your humanness and your mistakes and your missteps and your sidetracks and your setbacks are alarming to the parent because they don't have themselves have a secure attachment, the child learns, oh, something's scary, something's wrong, something's even disgusting about me, repulsive, unacceptable about me. I have to be what I am not. And I have to be good because if I'm not, I will not be worthy of love. I'll be cast out of the tribe and I won't survive. So, yes, Mate's right. You got to learn to see yourself. But the way that you do that is by getting seen by somebody else. And it's so hard. Most therapists don't know this. Most therapists want to fix you. Most therapists get really freaked out when you're struggling through a decision and making weird, crazy decisions. If you have an attachment-based therapist who's done their work, most likely some kind of analytical process, or maybe they've been in Al-Anon and Coda long enough, they're not anxious when you're making mistakes. They don't gasp in fear or tis tell you how disappointing that you are to them and that you're reflecting badly on them as a therapist. They don't do any of that because they have taken care of themselves and their own attachment wound. They just see you. And over time, a lot of it, a lot of hours, you repair the attachment wound. You heal the codependency. And in AA or NA or CODA or Families Anonymous or Al-Anon, when you do your fourth step, you write down all the ways that you've harmed people and you read that letter to somebody, their response is okay. It's like confession. They have no reaction, no judgment. They facilitate. Most sponsors listening to somebody read their fourth step, do their fifth step with them, read their moral inventory of everything that they can remember that they've done wrong to harm anybody. Most of them are better analysts and psychologists than most therapists because they don't think that the cure comes from some kind of wisdom or lecture. I tell my children, if your therapist tells you what to do or gives you advice, tell them you don't need another parent. You already have one. So yes, that's my long-winded answer to that. Great, great, great question. Thank you for it. Next question, two-parter. Somebody says, our almost 19-year-old son was diagnosed with anxiety, depression, and ASD, level 1 2 years ago, autism spectrum disorder. He was also diagnosed with ADHD, with ADD and dyslexia at the beginning of elementary school. Throughout his entire life, he accepted supports and thrived. It wasn't free from awkward social moments and other setbacks, but we managed as a family. Our son also did well academically until 11th grade, the year our district went back into in-person school for the first time post-pandemic. 11th and 12th grade were tumultuous. Emotional dysregulation inside the home, social isolation, poor academic performance, poor sleep hygiene, truancy, tech addiction, etc. While he has matured, no more emotional outbursts, he is stuck, unable to move forward with his life. Our son is adamant about not going to wilderness. My husband and I believe a wilderness program is the right modality to help him get unstuck, and we are united in our messaging, holding boundaries, etc. What advice can you share to help parents of and young adults with the high rigidity anxiety open their mind to giving wilderness a try? That's a really, really tough one. I mean, I don't know that I can be successful I don't have a hack necessarily to tell you how to trick the system and get them to go, but I'll talk about the principles involved in reducing resistance. Um, Somebody asked me this last week. I was speaking in Austin, Texas, and somebody said, I commented on how many men were in the meeting, and somebody asked the question, what can we do to get more men in these meetings, these parenting meetings? And I said, the first thing that you do is understand why it's threatening for a man to come to a meeting like this. So the first thing I would do is empathize, understand, ask questions, and understand your son's reason for not going and empathize. Genuinely empathize and honor his fears, his anxiety, his worries. What is his resistance? See, that's the main difference between therapists and lay people. Therapists are tasked with dealing with resistance. I don't treat resistance so that I can get to the real issue. I treat resistance because that's the issue, right? Why does a person not do something that could be good for them, that makes all the rational sense in the world, where there's something unconscious? So I don't have a quick solution for it. And you've tried, and you're both involved in caring parents. So I would understand, I would empathize, I would validate. Um, and then I suppose the next thing I would do is, make sure that your boundaries are clear about what you can and can't support, and then drop it. And then go about continuing, it sounds like you already do, continuing to do your work, and in essence, model for him what it's like for somebody to do their own work. When I tell all of you at the end of every one of these broadcasts that we want you to go to 12-step meetings, I was just talking to somebody, another professional, about this week. Part of the reason that I do that is because I think it can be helpful, and it's free, and that gets past the resistance of therapy is expensive, and it can happen at almost any time now that they're online. So you can go to a meeting almost any time of any day. There's other great things about it, like it's community support. If you choose to go farther and find a sponsor, you can call them anytime, day or night, and they can be available to you, whereas a professional is going to keep office hours, generally speaking. But beyond that, one of the reasons why I like for parents to go to these 12-step support groups is because I want you to know what it feels like to walk into a meeting. So my question to you, and I don't know if you're listening live or if this was sent in ahead of time, but my question to you is, have you gone to a 12-step meeting? Have you gone to an Al-Anon? Have you gone to Codependence Anonymous? Have you gone to Adult Children of Alcoholics or Families Anonymous? If you haven't, go to 6 of those. Introduce yourself to the group. Even share when it's time to share. Give out your phone number to other people. Do the things that people suggest that you do when you have somebody in your life that you love that's demonstrating self-destructive behaviors. And when you find your resistance to doing just what I said, maybe you won't even go. Maybe you think, I don't need that. Maybe you think, I want something much more direct to solve the issue that I'm bringing to you. Maybe you think those people are different than you. Maybe you think you're not the one with the problem. Those are all the same excuses that people have for not going to treatment, for primary care treatment themselves. Probably even one of those being your son. I can do this on my own. Go to 6 meetings, mom and dad. I ask all parents. If you're listening to me and you're not an Evoke client, try it. Go to 6 meetings. I was speaking recently at a very large gathering, and I was trying to demonstrate from the get-go the difficulty that we all feel, and how we're worried about what people think about us. So I started off my talk in front of a large audience. I was at the Delta Center where the Utah Jazz play basketball, speaking to a large crowd, and I said, who here has a question for me? And of course, virtually nobody raised their hands. And after a pause, I said, my point in asking that is, do you see how scary that is? To be wrong, or to be embarrassed, or to be a fool, or to demonstrate that you don't know, or to get it. Can you see how scary that was? Well, that's what the identified patient is dealing with. That's what our children are dealing with. That's what our loved one who's abusing alcohol is dealing with. So first understand. And a great book, and this seems to be a theme for this evening, for this broadcast, a great book that talks about everything I'm talking about from a research perspective. So if you're a research person, you want to see the data, read the book, Motivational Interviewing. It has hundreds of studies that support what I'm teaching you tonight. That to go against the defense, to try to get somebody to get rid of their crutches, is a mistake if there's nothing to replace it with. I was reading a book by Irving Yalom recently, who I don't think was a very good therapist. I really don't. Great writer, but not a very good therapist. But even he was able to say in his books, you can't take away the defense. You can't take away the symptom before the client learns to replace it with something, because the symptom is propping them up. You can't take away the crutch. Crutches are uncomfortable. They're fun for about 10 seconds. You know, when I was a little kid, we would get crutches and walk around. They're fun for about a minute, maybe. But try walking through the Salt Lake City airport with crutches on. See how fun it is. Try walking upstairs or downstairs at an office building and see how fun crutches are. You heal the wound, you go to it, the person will get rid of crutches themselves. But most therapists, Jamie Gill says in one of her books, that unkind people and inadequate therapists are famous for attacking the defense. They're famous for taking away crutches. People pride themselves on confrontation and telling people and calling them on their crap. There's no talent or insight in that. There's very little love in that. It has a self-righteous energy. It has a me up here, you down there. It has an us versus them. It has the energy of mental illness, actually, generally speaking. There are exceptions, of course, but not as many as we imagine. The work is to make him feel safe. And when he feels safe, he'll drop down the wall. And that's not an easy thing to say. And I know that doesn't give you direct, specific things to say or to do. And if you want one, if any of you listening to me want one for today, go home to the identified patient in your life and apologize for something you've done. And if you can't think of anything, ask your spouse or ex-spouse. They got something you can apologize for. But if you don't even have that, it could sound as simple as, I was talking to this guy or listening to this podcast, and I realized that I, in a sense, have been making you responsible for my feelings, my anxiety, my worries. I've been making those your responsibility. And I'm going to learn to take care of myself. I'm going to start going to meetings. I'm going to try Al-Anon. I'm going to go to psychotherapy so that I am more clear and more sure not to put my anxiety and stress on you, because I don't think that's helping whatever it is that you're struggling with. Find something like that genuinely to apologize and watch how that seed starts to sprout and change the whole relationship. It's really fundamentally sound psychologically that the more that you take accountability and model accountability for your mistakes, I say to parents, take 100% responsibility for your 1% of the contribution to the problem, and watch how the energy shifts. Watch how the child or the spouse or the friend or the sibling feels less threatened. Watch how the walls come down over time. Watch how the next sentence out of their mouth was, it wasn't all you. I had a large part in this dynamic also. Great questions this evening. Are there any more questions? Nope, no more questions. And we're close to the end of the hour. All right. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. I narrated the second one. If you want to do a deep dive in your own work, I say this all the time. This is the best thing you can do for your child. You want the best outcome for your child? Finding You is our offering. And like I've said before, if you feel at all like I might have a conflict of interest because I'm selling a product, go to somebody else. Go to Onsite. Tara Holbrook in Idaho is somebody I was talking to somebody about today. Go to her program in Idaho, Nampa, Idaho. Go to the Bridge to Recovery in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Go to Karen Foundation's program, Breakthrough. Go to the Meadows program, Survivors. Go to Refuge to Recovery program. Go to the House of the Call. Go to any of those. I don't necessarily recommend uh, programs that do a lot of psychoeducation. These are all experiential programs that have you look at your own childhood, your own programming, your own unconscious material. If this was all about conscious stuff and psychoeducation, this would be easy. If this was about conscious stuff, I would be the best parent in the world because I've spent the last 30 years studying virtually nothing except for psychology and child development and parenting. So if it was about the information, the data, I would be near perfect. And as my family would very, very willingly tell you, I am not anywhere close to the greatest parent. I'm a human parent. And like my daughter Emma said, when she was asked, she was sitting in a booth with me when the Journey of the Heroic Parent came out, and somebody said, "So is your dad a great dad?" And she said, "Well, he's not that great." And I was standing right there, and she said, "But he knows it, so that makes it livable." That's really what they need from you. They need you to do your work so that you can be human. And it becomes really clear when you're human, you have no business obsessing about fixing the child. And really, that energy can be better spent on continuing to peel back the layers and understanding yourself. November 8th is the next offering for Finding You. We also have running concurrently, actually. November 10th through 12th is an online version of that, about a third of the cost, half of the time. And you don't have to travel. Like I mentioned, the young adult intensive workshop 10 to 5 on November 4th. Contact Intensives at Evoke Therapy for any of this. We have a Returning to You offering. I'll be running that one next week, October 25th through 29th. If you've been to Finding You and you want to come back, Returning to You is that program. And then March 6th through 10th, which is already half full. So if you're interested in coming back, if you've been to Finding You, sign up to that sooner rather than later. And then I'm going to be doing a Finding Connection workshop in the first half of February, February 7th through 11th. This is going to be with 4 couples. And it's basically a Finding You, but with couples. These are not high conflict couples, right? It's not time to do a lot of couples work, but it's time, if you're able and willing, to come with your partner and to side by side do the work. I believe that part of having a lifelong love affair with your partner is to learn to fall in love with their dilemma over and over again. In other words, to understand their wound. And ideally for them to understand it too, but for you to understand it and love it and have compassion for it and how it shows up in your family, in your life, in your marriage. So if you want to do that and you can do that work together, Finding Connection Workshop, February 7th through 11th, I'll be running that, is the next offering. We also have custom programs for couples and families. Just go to our website to find out more or email intensives@evoketherapy.com to find out or sign up for those. We have support groups for current and alumni families. For our current alumni families, October 26th, next week at 7 p.m., is that next offering for our wilderness families. Once a month, we have an alumni only meeting. October 24th, next Tuesday, is that next offering at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Once a month, we have an intensive support group. November 7th at 6 p.m. is that next offering. Go to our website at evoketherapy.com/family-involvement to learn more. If you want to do a family trek, an experiential trip with your family into the wilderness, 3, 4, 5, 6 days, the family trek is that option. It can happen in the middle of your child's wilderness program. It can happen at the end during transition. It can happen separate from the wilderness program. It can happen even if your child hasn't been to wilderness. It's a family wilderness experience. Contact admissions at evoketherapy.com to find out more about our trek experiences. If you want to coach now, since the pandemic, we're doing virtual coaching all over the world for parents, couples, families, individuals, codependency, trauma, um, dealing with transitioning children home or transitioning to the next stage of life. We have therapists and coaches that are available to do coaching online with a variety of profiles and backgrounds. So contact coaching at evoketherapy.com. All of our coaches have been introduced to and are aware of the attachment model, the stuff that I'm talking about and teaching tonight. So that's one place that you can get some of that support in that way. Like I said, we ask all current parents to try out. This is the recommendation that these programs make also, to try or experiment with 6 of any combination of the following 12-step support groups: Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, familiesanonymous.org, or adultchildren.org. Also, refugerecovery.org or NAMI.org, which stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, have free classes and resources in your local community. All of these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. Just search Finding You in Evoke Therapy Podcast. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and search Finding You there and listen there. You can also find the rebroadcast of the video versions of these broadcasts on Evoke's YouTube channel the day after their broadcast. Just go to YouTube and search Evoke Therapy Programs there. You can find Evoke Therapy Programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on X, formerly known as Twitter, Threads, and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. You can find Evoke Intensives on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives, and on Facebook, you can find us by searching either Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, the Evoke Therapy blog has wonderful content each week. If you want to give back for people that can't afford treatment, the 3 charitable partners that we work with are choosementalhealth.org, sky'sthelimitfund.org, or evokefamilyfoundation.org. You can donate. Your tax-deductible donation can be earmarked to a population, an issue, even a region of the country that you feel close to, that's close to your heart. All of these donations are tax-deductible donations. All right, folks, my next broadcast will be October 24th, next week at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. I'll be talking about healing my child while I am still healing. This was a request, a beautiful title recommended by one of our audience members. So I'm really excited to do this one, talking about while you're still in the process of healing, how can you help and support and encourage your child to begin and to maintain their healing process. Thanks for joining me this evening. I hope, as always, that these broadcasts are a helpful point of contact in your week. And as always, for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thank you for showing up here and being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.